So my name is Benjamin Kromno, and I think I would like to start with the audience to get some involvement. So how many of you came actually by plane or airplane to San Diego? I would say it's roughly 80–90% of the room. So how many of you actually used a mobile phone to look or book the flight? Doesn't matter. So it's a fair smaller percentage, maybe 10–20% here in the room. So maybe this talk will give you some information how to do it better next time for those who didn't use an app or a mobile browser, or maybe the other way around. We will find out. So spoiler alert, yes, it can matter. So our paper is called Are Some Prices More Equal Than Others? Evaluating Store-Based Price Differentiation. We are Hugo Jonker, Stefan Karsch, Benjamin Kromno, and Gottfried Meisters. Gottfried was the master student in this project, and I'm the PhD student. The other both are the supervisors from TH Kern and Open University. So the project started based on a news we got from the travel magazine Clever Reisen, a German one. And what they did was a manual investigation. So they wanted to know, like, does it matter if you use an app or maybe a desktop computer, a desktop browser? So they just compared prices there. So they went there, the authors did the entire thing manually, and then they compared the stuff. And what I found was that there was actually a difference of 160 euros. So yeah, we were shocked. We said, that must be investigated. So, but before I go deeper into this, let me come back to the idea, what is price discrimination, price differentiation, because maybe not everyone has seen it before. And when you look at price differentiation, maybe I can give an example. So the Big Mac index is something that would reflect on the purchasing power of a country. So this is something that is quite accepted, right? So if the wages of a country or of the population in the country is higher, yeah, you pay a bit more. So we wouldn't say this is unfair. But there are also other things, and this is price discrimination, where a certain group pays a different price. And this is a problem. So this is something we feel is unfair. And this is most of the time what we then call price discrimination. In this case, price discrimination is a subgroup of price differentiation, because just as you have price differentiation doesn't mean you have automatically price discrimination. Okay, so to see where our work starts and where previous work has done something, I show you a simple model. So it breaks it down and simplifies stuff quite a lot. But what we have is we have vendors, they sell items, and we have stores where they sell the items. And then we have resellers that maybe sell the same items. And then we have clients where users actually open sessions to buy that stuff that is offered there. And when we look at previous work, they wanted to know, okay, if this grouping exists based on individual user attributes. So they considered the client and the session that is opened. And for that, so what you usually do, how you can study that is you take two clients and then you say, okay, how about we change the location? One client is there, another client is there. Then we check a price for the same item and we see if it matters, if it really makes a difference, right? And they do it not only for location, they do it for user history, operation system, device, fingerprint, and so on, and so on, and so on. And then maybe they find something and try to trace it back to something that they have investigated. In our case, we used, or we said, okay, could it be now that it's also based on a store you're using? So that means the grouping is based on that one. And that would be something like, are you using a desktop browser, are you using a mobile app or a mobile browser, or maybe the localization. So are you booking on the .fr, for example, for France, or are you booking at .us or .com or whatever? Does that make a difference? So coming to the research question we investigated. So we said, okay, first of all, we would like to know if this actually exists, and in a more controlled experiment than a manual investigation. And when we see that it exists, it's of course very interesting to know if one of these platforms is actually overpriced or underpriced, okay? And we said, are there any patterns? Why patterns? Because if there are patterns, you could actually use them against these services. So it's also very interesting. There are two things maybe to say about the scope. So what you could do is you could also compare different vendors. So let's say something like Opodo or Air France, and then you can see if they serve different prices. But this is not what you want, because these are price comparison portals, so it is already a solved problem. What we want to know is if the same vendor serves different prices over different platforms. So because they have different stores. So now I'm coming to the point, how to study store-based pricing. And so there are different approaches, has been there in the past already. The manual analysis or study by Clever Horizon I already mentioned. There's also an approach that you could use crowdsourcing, but it has a few problems. So I think the manual analysis suffers that you cannot really scale it, while the crowdsourcing has the problem that you have the users in there. And that can also be a problem because you want to get them more or less out of the picture. We'll explain later why. So the way how we decided to do the entire thing is automated scraping. And so now coming to the point that I just mentioned. So first of all, if you do automated scraping, we are now in a situation where we have to study the entire thing through different clients that are not the same. So we have either mobile phones or we have maybe desktop PCs. And this is a bit of a challenge. So you need a multi-platform data acquisition system, right? And for just doing something on mobile phones, one problem is that you cannot just simply simulate them. So of course you could do that. So what various studies have done before us was like, you take a regular desktop browser, you take the user agent string, you change this to, hi, I'm a mobile browser, and then you are done. Okay, this is of course very detectable. I'm full of a room of web security people. I know you know that. So, and also other researchers found actually out that this leads to different outcomes. So if you do, for example, web privacy studies and you think you can just simply emulate a mobile device, you don't get the same results than using an actual mobile device. Okay, so this is important to keep in mind. We thought, okay, this is a bit of a problem because when you do such studies, then you need to buy a lot of phones if you want to compare things. So we thought, hey, maybe we can get away just by taking an emulator. We were not that lucky, so the problem is emulators are very slow and actually they are also very unstable. So I cannot really recommend to do that. Of course, you can then just run your experiments longer and so on, but it's kind of a pain. The other thing then what you need to pay attention to is that you need to eliminate confounding factors, of course. And all the things I mentioned before, like these user-based features, you have to make them equal, okay, that they, to fade them out. The next thing is prices change over time, so you need to synchronize your scrapers. And of course, humans and also technology is not perfect. So there can be all kinds of errors, like pricing errors or replication inconsistencies in your servers. So with that, we said the best way to address that is actually to have a longitudinal scan or data over a long time. Okay, the second challenge is also interesting because when you contrast different platforms or different stores, the problem is the items are not the same any longer. So there can be different items and you need to find out what of these items are still the same. So you need to identify them. And one way that what you have to do is first is you need to select the right attributes. And this is not so easy. So if you think of an item, like you want to have a rental car can be just the type of the car, it can be a certain brand, there can be insurance included, there can be GPS. So you need to be very careful with what you use for your selection. And it goes even on. If you take some of them and think, hey, they're very cool, so we could just use the flight number because this is unique, right? No, it's not, because there's, for example, code share flights. So the MH17, maybe some of you remember what that was. Then there's normalization. So this is, I think, standard what you do in every data cleaning process, so that can also happen for other things. So you try to get the same name for them and uniquely identify them. And there was one thing we didn't consider, and that are attribute changes. So attribute changes is something that just happened and we didn't encounter, or we didn't thought of it before. It's like, for example, a flight can shift. So that happens actually in practice, that a flight just disappeared in your data set and you thought, why is it gone? And the next day you find a new flight that hasn't been there before. So, and then actually you can use that to correlate that. So we correlate the things and then we manually check when we had all of these incidences if these are still the same things. Okay. So we then created a framework and said, okay, let's address this. I think the framework is very easy to grasp for you. So it's a scheduler that controls the scraper and takes all the data and collects this together. And then we have scrapers, and some of these scrapers are connected physically to a mobile phone. So everything can be distributed, but there we need to connect that physically, and then we can use it to actually scrape via actual mobile phones. So for the clients, you want to synchronize them. For the synchronization, there are 5 steps I have just written down here. And we said there are 2 points actually where it becomes important to synchronize. Is first, after everything had started and is initialized. So for example, apps often crash at the beginning, so you wait that the app is there and has really started, then you can start looking for or to type in your search queries. Same, you connect with the browser, so you start the browser, then you connect to the website, then you wait, and then both are synchronized. And then you want to synchronize the second time before you hit the button, so that both send the request at the same time. Okay, so and we use this then to conduct a study. We thought, okay, maybe let's have a case study for flight ticket prices, because there was already the travel magazine that claimed there would be something, so let's investigate that. So we conducted our evaluation by checking 5 vendors. 3 of them are resellers, so you can see them there. And we said, okay, we take either a desktop browser or a mobile app, or we take the localization France versus Germany. And in one case for KJAC, we also said, hey, let's take a mobile browser. So there we have actually 3 shops. Then we took a couple of random dates and between July and August, and we also put some random cities in Europe there. And then we said, okay, let's do the entire thing 3 times per day. Let's do it for 45 days, and then we get 135 comparisons. So what you can see is how successful that is. So scrapers often break, and this is a problem. So there's lots of comparisons we couldn't get at the end, but there are also some setups where it worked very well. So I think the only one that really failed is more or less Eurowings. The others are quite all right. So at least we got enough data that we could analyze everything. And when you have that, the thing is you get trips. And before explaining all of this and losing the entire audience, let's zoom a little bit in. And we have like 2 flights there that you can see. And if you have multiple platforms, they may not be shown on all platforms or all shops. And so what we said, okay, in this case, it looks very good. So we got all of them, but in this case, it looks wild. So if you see here, KJAC is something what showed a lot of actually connections or trips that were shown only once. And this is why it looks so really wild. And also the overlap between the mobiles and the desktop shops is not that huge, right? But so this is what you can encounter then in practice. So then we went to the analysis and we wanted to know, okay, if there is any store-based pricing in the wild actually. And this is actually what you would expect, and is also something we observed, right? So you see all these black dots here. That means they're completely overlapped, and there was not much to see, right? So this is actually how it should be. But when we now zoom out, and this is what we did here, is we took all prices or all items that we could match from 2 shops, and then we calculated the difference between them. And we used the relative difference so that it doesn't screw the picture instead of the total difference. And then we said, okay, let's put that together for all the search queries we have done, and to get an imagination if they benefit one shop or one of them over another. And in general, we could say maybe the top 4 are not that bad. So there are a few things to consider, but it looks like, okay, pretty all right. If you look to the bottom, then this is a problem. Because now we see actually already the first one is below 0, quite a lot. And when we look at this one, then we can say, oh, this is really something. So what happened here? So let me zoom in on one of them. So this is one item, what you can see over the entire time frame, what we scraped. And we see that actually, so some holes, of course, where the scraper failed, but overall, it looks like quite a large amount of data. And we see that most of this, the opodo.fr is over the opodo.de dots. That means the price was actually always higher whenever we checked it. And I think so I checked all the entire data set here, all the prices we could retrieve. And it looks like that actually only in 2 cases there was a price which was lower for the other shop. Okay. All right. So that actually answers already the first two research questions I had, right? So we were questioning either there is if this actually exists, if there's something like this, and second, if there are platforms that become or that are benefit or preferred by some of these vendors. And then the question is now, are there any patterns? So, and to get into the pattern analysis, we say, okay, let's create a monstrous heat map to see if we can see anything from this. And it's actually doing the same thing as the thing I had before, but here we now said, okay, let's see how it is then over time. And this is the new insight we get from this. And let me zoom in a little bit. So, I mean, there are interesting things to spot. But we start maybe here because what we could see there, and I think it's not so good to see probably on the beamer, but we have a bit of a wave pattern. So it's red means it's more expensive, blue means it's less expensive than the other one, and we see that it always shifts from red to blue and from blue back to red. Not really steep peaks, but it goes over like 2, 3, 4, mostly four data points, and then it shifts the color again. And that's interesting because this is kind of a wave, right? So and what you do with waves, for example, when you go surfing, you try to duck dive them. So duck diving would be one thing you could do actually, right? So let's look a little bit into it. And what we found was, like when you break it down to each item over time, then unfortunately we couldn't find like a pattern that goes through all of these items, right? So they're not consistent really, but they have the same schema. So they go really up and down, up and down, up and down. So what you could do actually, you could avoid that. So you could just switch to the other platform and then get the cheaper price maybe a few hours later. So that's interesting. So here, this is what we observed actually. Okay, let's come to the next thing. Even though I'm a bit fast, but I think that's all right. Even if I stop earlier, then we have earlier lunch maybe. So, and the next one is that we looked at Air France because Air France was stable. So there was just everything we had there is not that much data, but everything we got there was had a difference, and this was interesting. So we plotted that, well, one of them here, and what you can see, let me make it a little bit more legible, was this actually. So there was only a €1 difference for the lower prices, but when it got to the higher prices, we got €5 difference, and then finally it falls back to €1 difference when the prices go back. So that was very interesting. So actually, we cannot explain what it exactly is, but it looks like there is some type of structure in there. And we speculate that with a lot of more data, we will probably find something that might be relatable back to what they do in the back end. It could be also some kind of pricing, but it's a bit weird. So it's a bit unfortunate that we don't have a whole lot more of data here. Coming to the last one, I think I want to point out here is Expedia.fra, and what we saw there is that we had two search queries, and the one was 2 weeks earlier than the other one. So, 2 weeks earlier. So our price, or let's say the queries really ended. So like the flight started at the end of our measurements, and this is what you see in the lower rows. There we could actually see 2 weeks, exactly starting 2 weeks before the flight goes off, that there is a price difference between the two. So unfortunately, we couldn't see that for the other one, but this feels like our conclusion would be here that we really, or if you do these kind of studies, you really need to pay attention to these things. So that seems to play a role for some vendors. Okay, let's come to the discussion and summary. So of course, there is, when you do something like this, the question is, are there any alternative explanations actually for that? And so we were wondering, okay, are there tax differences? Because this is one thing that could make sense, why prices could be different. And we say absolutely no. Why? It's very easy because we have multiple vendors and we can cross relate these items between the vendors. And if there would be taxes, actually we would see that more than one vendor would be affected here. Then a different question is, are the variations due to the data centers. And this is what I have already mentioned before. We think, yeah, this is possible, but it shouldn't be a huge effect because this is why we collected so over a long time our data set. The next question is, and this is a very interesting one, do our automated search queries influence the outcome? And I think this is really hard to answer because when you look at something in a system that maybe changes because you look at this, then you don't know. So we don't know. But what is also interesting is that I think we have checked all of them, and only one of them is not in the Tranco top 10K. Most of them are ranked higher, also better. So they are somewhere below top 10K. And that means we expect them to have multiple hundreds of, maybe thousands of users per day. So our 3 search queries that we do per day shouldn't influence it that much. And this is also important because this has an ethical implication, right? So if you do the study and you would raise the prices for one item a lot just because you study it, that means other users would have to pay more for it. So this is why it is interesting. So we say, yeah, it could matter, but we don't think it has a strong effect, right? Okay, and then the last one is also interesting, is the A/B testing. And A/B testing is interesting because you cannot mitigate A/B testing. It will always be there. If it's there, what can you do against this? Not much, but you can account for it. So you could actually make a study where you can figure out if there is A/B testing in place. So this is the only thing we can do. This is something we couldn't account for because we couldn't buy just 20 mobile phones. So we didn't have the funding to buy 20 mobile phones. So I couldn't afford it, actually. I'm a grad student. But yeah, so this is one problem to do. But is it a problem for the conclusions or maybe the results we observed? And I think it's not. So I say again, it's there, but it's not a problem. Why? Easy. If you have A/B testing, and the A/B testing leads to the fact that one shop is massively more expensive than the other one, then your algorithm is screwed. And for us, shop-based pricing is nothing else than an algorithm. A/B testing is also an algorithm. Okay? So that's why we say it's also actually okay. Okay, coming to the conclusion. I showed you the first systematic investigation of store-based pricing. So we made a framework for that to investigate it and had an initial evaluation. And we feel this is a very interesting field to expand further because price differences seem to occur very frequently. And we also saw that actually same vendors show strong indicator, or that some vendors show very strong indications for store-based pricing. But what was also interesting or strange, that they don't reward customer loyalty. So what we saw for Opodo, for example, is that app users got higher prices, so on average. We would have expected that if you use an application, for example, that it would give you some bargains or benefits, right? Yeah, we also found that data acquisition is really a tough point here and it needs to be studied further. Yeah, and with that, thank you very much for your extension and hope for your questions.
I just wanted to ask, so you check the price differentiation across different domains of the same store, application, and so on.
Yeah.
Did you take a look at if there's price differentiation also across different users but at the same store? Because I had like recent experience with actual flights.
Yeah. Yeah, this is I think what have done the other studies, right? Where you take different users. So our goal was to really keep them the same as much as possible to get the user out of the picture. This is probably not 100% possible. So especially when you look at something like profiles. For example, how can you have, so if you would like to study that, how could you have an exact same profile on a mobile app compared to a desktop browser? I think it's not 100% possible. The only thing you can do is something like using your data accounts. That would be possible to say, hey, I'm the same user, but or I have the same profile at least. So we did not do it because this was not the scope of the study, but thanks for the question.
Any more questions? Okay, I have one. Have you guys thought of creating a company that replicates this that can be used for people to find the best way to approach booking tickets? So essentially being a service, let's say like Kayak, but as opposed to comparing United to American, someone can say, I use American, I want to do this trip. Can you have a distributed infrastructure with mobile devices in different countries, checking different stores, and offering like the best option for some money?
No, we did not, but I thank you very much for the business idea.
Yeah.
We'll consider it in the future.
1% of whatever you may be here. So,